Hi everyone, welcome. Oh my gosh, what a nice, beautiful Monday. We're all here together. I'm so glad to see all of you. Welcome to Green Apple Books on the Park. My name is Car Johnson. I'm the event coordinator for Green Apple. And tonight I am delighted to welcome back to the Bay Sally Wen Mao for the release of her collection, The Kingdom of Surfaces. Let's give a hand for Sally. Sally is joined tonight by new Bay Area resident, where is she? Cathy Park Hong. Let's give a hand for Cathy. This is a pretty stellar team we have this evening. I'm really glad that we all get to be here together to experience it. I appreciate you all joining us both in person and online. Hello, online audience. We are broadcasting from San Francisco. We are on Ramaytush Ohlone land, and we hope that you join us in our pledge to turn land acknowledgement into action by donating either your time or your monetary means to an Indigenous organization every time you hear, or in my case, speak a land acknowledgement. I have very brief business before we get to the fun part of the evening. Now is a good time to silence your phones if you have not already. I would say picture taking is encouraged, but you can talk to our authors about that. They might have a different opinion. Please do check out our full event calendar on our website at greenapplebooks.com. We have a really great season ahead of us, including the event that you are currently attending. The restroom is behind us. It is available after the event and not during the event for obvious reasons. It's available during the event to attendees of our event during event time. It's just kind of the one place that my colleagues have that is off the sales floor, and we try and keep it peaceful and intact for them throughout regular business hours. But you are joining us in our house this evening, and we want you to be comfortable. So thank you for being cool about it. We have books from both of our authors available at the front. You can find them there. If you've been here before, you've certainly heard me say that when you buy books from us, not only do you support us as an independent bookstore, you also support the authors who put so much work into making these books, and then you get to have a book, which might be the best part. So if you are able, we always appreciate it. Thank you so kindly. Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce both authors at the top of the hour. We're going to have a reading from Sally, and then a conversation between Sally and Cathy, and then we'll open up for audience Q&A at the end and get to as many of your burning questions at the end as we can. First, Cathy Park Hong is the author of Minor Feelings, a Pulitzer Prize finalist, which won the National Book Critics Circle Award for Autobiography and earned her recognition on Time's 100 Most Influential People of 2021 list. She is also the author of poetry collections Engine Empire and Dance Dance Revolution, chosen by Adrienne Rich for the Barnard Women's Poets Prize. Hong is the recipient of the Wyndham Campbell Prize, the Guggenheim Fellowship, and the National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship. She is a full professor in English at UC Berkeley. Please give another hand for Cathy Park Hong. And last but most certainly not least, Sally Wen Mao is the author of the poetry collections Oculus, a finalist for the Los Angeles Times Book Prize, and Mad Honey Symposium. The recipient of 2 Pushcart Prizes and a National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship, she was recently a Cullman Fellow at the New York Public Library and a Shearing Fellow at the Black Mountain Institute. She is the author of the forthcoming fiction collection, 9 Tales, and the collection, The Kingdom of Surfaces, is the reason we are here tonight. Let's give another hand for Sally Wen.
All right, hello. Hi, everyone. Oh my gosh. I always love returning to this city. It feels like a homecoming. I did grow up right outside San Francisco, and I'm so honored to be here at Green Apple's Books in the Park. I have been to many events here, and I always felt like, oh, I would love to have an event here. So, and thank you so much, Car. Thank you so much, Cathy, for being here with me tonight. I am so honored that you're here. I have been a huge fan of Cathy for a long time. Before I saw her like 12 years ago once on the street and thought her outfit was great. So I'll read a few poems, like maybe 3 from The Kingdom of Surfaces. And I will start with a poem set in San Francisco. And actually, Cathy published this poem a few years ago. And it's called The Queen's Room. And the Queen's Room refers to the name of the auction block where the first Chinese immigrant women were sold back around the gold rush era. The Queen's Room. Note the tasteful draperies over the windows, the view of the canneries. Salt air gagged, we arrived west. Sunburnt necks, teenagers, most of us, like tanagers, over the sea, we were red-winged, ready. The men who made us come here feigned betrothal, I don't know how to pronounce things, sorry. Had us on our backs and talked of gold. Not now so many pretty girls, lewd and unaccompanied. Debarking the ship, we were led to the barracoons. The bidders waited. Why call it the Queen's Room? 150 jewels clothed in lice and rags up for the highest bidder. Our mouths cash cows for our husbands. Forced to sign contracts we could not read. We did not know the words, did not know merchant or earthquake or gold. Did not know debt or price or penny or worth. Obad with gravel and gold. I'm sick of speaking for women who've died. Their stories and their disappearances bludgeon me in my sleep. Their language is the skein in my throat that unravels every time a bullhorn blows, every time a road is paved, every time a railroad is constructed, ballast to blast, built to last against the orange flames of an open, unwritten sky. The bad ballad of a silenced, hell-bent woman bled its way into my jaws, and I wake up this morning, every morning, eating my disquiet. Crack my window open, their breath rushes in. Me, this body, the same weight of disappearance, same weight of fortune. Last night, a woman from another century entered me, and her male phantoms possessed me all night. I was warm, cold, and savage with their touch. Heatless factories shorn of silk, muslin, and selvage. Machineries like guns, no salve for the women's cracked hands, no salvaging their rations, their ambitions for survival. There was a child of a famine. There was a girl sold for 3 gilded ounces at the old San Francisco port. They sailed through me, and I turned gold with that touch. Let's see, I'm going to mix it up a little bit. So my mom is here. She's right here. So I thought maybe I'd read a poem that mentions her. Wet Market. From youth, I was taught that fresh meant alive until the moment you buy it. My mother used to pick up chickens at the wet market, slit the throats herself. At 4, I helped her defeather the fowl, drain its blood in a vat. My parents barely ate meat until the 1980s. In re-education camps, they ate ground pork once a year. In America, we don't buy live chickens, but my mother always wanted to see the fish alive, head on, before we took it home. Scraps were the best sustenance, the eyes, the head, the scales. At 12, I returned for the first time to Wuhan. In the wet market, I touch live snapping turtles, frogs in vats, smell the musk of open air stalls. You want your meat squirming and slippery, not the squids and king conch packed in ice. The butcher slices an eel in half. I squint in disbelief at the dying I witness. Live kill, slit eel, slit eyes I've been called back home. My sightline, a bloodless gash. Wet markets flourish with produce, feeding a generation. Mine, the offspring of those who starved, like my father, in their mother's wombs. Now pundits call for their ban, citing barbarian diets, raccoons, offal, civet cats, bushmeat, not spinach and wood ear, plums and star apples at the Berkeley Farmers Market. No one bats an eye. How lovely it must be to possess a body cleaved of hunger and horrors, its stench so inherently clean. Nightly I dream of Angel Island's quarantine station. My immigrant body scrubbed raw with carbolic soap. My immigrant belongings fumigated in sulfur steam. The evening I saw death, we ate eel braised with bitter melon, drowned it in cloudy broth. To this day, the memory how I tasted marrow like an elegy frozen in bone. And we'll stop there. Thank you so much.
Can we give one more hand for Sally? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for bearing with me. Now I'd like to welcome back Cathy to be in conversation with Sally. And I'm going to turn this microphone on.
Hi. Hi.
Hi.
That was a wonderful reading. I'm so happy to be up here with you because, I'm also such a fan of your poetry from your first book. So it's such a delight to have a conversation with you to talk about the ravishing kingdom of surfaces. But I thought actually I would start with like a non-kingdom of surface question, just like a more of a broader question because it is a homecoming of sorts, and since I'm also new to the Bay Area, I'm just curious. Like, I know you grew outside of San Francisco, but I was just curious, like how the city or being from here really kind of shaped you as a poet.
And that's such a great question. I just the other day I went back to Valencia Street. I actually used to be an 826 Valencia kid. Like I took like a class in when I was in high school with Dave Eggers, and my mom would drive me all the way up here every week, every Wednesday evening, just to take this class. And yeah, I mean, that was a very precious time in my life because I discovered what it meant to not write in the closet or like write in complete solitude, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, that was the first time that I understood that writing can be more than just like this activity I did when I was like by myself and like sad, right?
Yeah. What was that, Dave? Is it three? What was that organization called?
Oh, it's called 826 Valencia.
826.
Yeah.
I remember hearing about that.
Yeah.
Like, and I was like, I always thought it was jealous of all the high school students who had the opportunity to take classes there. Even though I'm not from San Francisco. But that's a privilege. Anyway, I read through. I was rereading Kingdom of Surfaces today, and I made so many notes, and had so many thoughts. I was thinking, first of all, actually, while reading this book, I was thinking of this book by Anne Emling Cheng, Ornamentalism. Have you read that?
Yes,
I'm
have.
assuming you have, right? Yeah, but I guess I was just thinking about her kind of idea. Ornamentalism is a kind of play on Orientalism. It's a kind of homonym of sorts, and she was talking about how Asian femininity. A lot of her book is about sort of the perception of Asian femininity, and where she says a yellow woman is persistently sexualized, yet barred from sexuality, simultaneously made and unmade by the aesthetic project. And she talks about how because of the unlike the objectification of Black women, Asian female femininity is ornamental. It's always considered decorative, shallow, excessive, and it's a sort of a theory of being, a kind of as a thing, And I think there's a lot of that in your book. The Asian female body comes up again and again, and it's always the speaker's sort of a really kind of conflicted relationship with this perception of the Asian body, but in particular, its connection, the Asian female's body connection to, imported commodified goods that, come from China, like silk or porcelain, rosewood, tea, and, there are also a lot of connotations to colonialism. And what I thought was really cool in this book were just sort of these like questions of beauty and how it intersects with trade, right? And so you have, there's like the kind of colonial history with a relationship with China and the West, with the opium trade and so forth. There's the trading of silk, porcelain, but also there's also the trafficking of sex. There's the sex trafficking and how the trafficking of personhood, and how this idea of personhood becomes totally degraded in the West in terms of Asian femininity. And so these are like, and it comes up again in like a lot of your poems. Like I noticed that in a lot of your poems, you have they're titled after objects, like or materials like porcelain. Silk, poppies, and jade, and so forth. And there's a really there's so many strong themes running throughout the book, and I think a lot of it, especially for younger poets, there's always this question of how a collection comes together. And with these, when you were writing these poems, like, did they kind of happen sort of more intuitively, where you were just writing, where you were writing like a collection, these individual poems, and then these themes that I discussed sort of emerged organically on its own, or was it a little bit more intentional in that you were thinking about, these, you were thinking about the Asian body, you were thinking about surfaces and so forth, and then you kind of, and that was a sort of generative inspiration. That was how you generated poems.
Yeah, like amazing, wonderful question. And also reference to Anne Olin Chen. She is an incredible like writer, an incredible thinker, and I remembered I connected with her back when I was I had published Oculus maybe. Yeah, I did an interview with her for I think it was Bomb magazine.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I remembered there was a lot of like coincidental like common obsessions that she and I had. And one of them was the actress Anime Wang, who appeared a lot in my last book, Oculus. And then another one that is actually like a big coincidence, or maybe it wasn't a coincidence at all, because just the way that our brains function. But in her book Ornamentalism, she had a whole chapter on China Through the Looking Glass, which is like that Met exhibition from 2015. And I actually had written a poem called The Kingdom of Surfaces that was like set at that Met exhibition in 2015 that had been cut out of Oculus. And I cut it out of Oculus. I asked my editor whether I could add it last minute, and he said no. And then I was thinking that, maybe this is like not. Maybe this poem is its own thing, because this is a 12-part poem. It's very elaborate. It's very ambitious, and it imagines me as Alice, and I'm looking through like this portal through the looking glass of like this imagination, this like imagined version of China that's like topsy-turvy. And so I was, and with that poem, I thought, well, this is really trying to probe into some of the themes that I was thinking about a lot with Oculus, the themes of like spectacle, the themes of Asiatic like femininity, but then I realized that there was another thread there too, and that other thread was like the objects, the things, right? Like Oculus was more concerned maybe with image, like the image of the camera, and the image of like the gaze and technology and things like that. But in the Kingdom of Surfaces, in the poem, which I wrote like back in 2016, I was really I started tracing these weird rabbit holes, right? Like a literal rabbit hole, Alice, following the rabbit. I found, the history of silk making, and also the history of porcelain and objects, and how that is all, and the obsession with those things, like the obsession with like these beautiful things that are imported out of China, but at the same time, like at the same time that there was this huge enduring obsession for that type of aesthetic, there was there was like a lot of demonizing the people too, right? So like during, like in the 19th century, that was the height of anti-Chinese sentiment in America, and it was also, when the Opium Wars were being waged, and Europe forced China to open its ports and forced like the importation of opium, which obviously it created a lot of like massive amounts of problems for the people of China. And I was thinking about how it's all weirdly related. Well, you mentioned like poppies and jade, for example. That poem is a poem about the Sacklers, who you see them in the museum's walls, like they had a wing at the Met until very recently, and the guy whose name is kind of slapped onto a lot of those exhibitions, Arthur M. Sackler, he was like the patriarch of the Sackler family, but he died before the advent of like the opioid epidemic. Like I think he died in 1987. But he actually invented like the marketing strategies that the Sacklers employed, which led to like the rise of OxyContin, and he was obsessed with Chinese objects. He like from an early time, he was just obsessed with collecting these things, right? Like he loved like the furniture, the antiques, and he just was like this obsessive collector of these objects, and then it kind of got me thinking about like the Opium Wars themselves. Like after the Opium Wars, happened, after that happened, like the British and the French, they went and they looted the old summer palace and they took away all of these priceless artifacts, and it was all because they were feeding the opium to the general population, which is kind of what the Sacklers were doing, right? So I was just trying, like, I guess I was just following a thread, right? With this poem, I realized that there were all of these other things that were happening that, you know, I wasn't maybe thinking about them as much in Oculus, but there's connective tissue between them.
That's such an irony that, like, the CEO, the oligarch of opiates, was also obsessed with Chinese art, and it's like really kind of uncanny, that connection to the opium wars too. I also love the idea of how Kingdom of Surfaces was a poem that you were trying to fit into a previous book of poems, but then it was too unwieldy and overwhelming a subject, and it just needed its own book. And I assume that other poems sort of spiraled out of that because you were following these different threads or these different journeys, so to speak. And I think that's a really, I mean, I feel like that happens to me too, where I'm working on, whether it's a poem or an essay, where I have this whole other scene or a concept in there, and I was like, no, I can't just like squeeze it in there. I can't just like, it has to be its own thing. So that's really that's really cool. I mean, so this book is also just, it's very like your other collections. There's still this continuity. There's still this interest in the gaze, and it's very kind of questioning of the optical. And also there's a lot of ekphrastic poems in here, and it's also very research based. And this is also just a personal question because I also do a lot of research myself, and I was wondering how I was wondering if you talk about that process of how you synthesize what you research into and into a poem. How do you metabolize what you read and turn it into a poem?
Yeah, that's a question that I think. I mean, it's fun, right? It's not like you're not trying to take the information and present it again. You're trying to reimagine it or reinvent it. And I guess it's not like the goal is not to regurgitate, but to actually transform it in some way. Like when I was writing Oculus, like the speculative anime Wan poems, I was reading a lot, like her biographies, but I didn't want to just, rely so much on that. And so there has to be some element that's invented, or there's some element that reshapes the knowledge, because honestly, when you're researching, what happens a lot is like you get so depressed, right? You get so depressed at what has happened, and like there's nothing you can do to change it, right? But poetry, it's like the space between like fiction and nonfiction, where you can really like invent things and also draw from things that are like real.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, poetry is a great space. I always find that when I'm researching, I have to give time, because I almost have to forget what I've researched in order to come back, for it to kind of be transformed, right? Because it's so easy to research something and that language to sort of to imitate that kind of voice of research and so forth. So, a lot of it is also, I find also time-based too. I thought that what was really cool, you didn't read these poems, but you start with these poems called, they're all called On Porcelain, and they're concrete poems, right? They're shaped like a vase. And I was wondering if if you could talk about this, because you don't just start with a poem. This poem, there are a few of them interspersed throughout the collection, and they're like they kind of scaffold the book in a way. And I was wondering if you could talk about why you chose to begin with on porcelain and why you chose this concrete form. I mean, it's the shape of a vase, but I think it's also because its curvilinearity is also reminiscent of the female body too. I thought so. Can you? I was wondering how that came about, because this is definitely a few of the poems that really. This is a poem that sort of was visually striking. Yeah.
Yeah. So I wrote these on porcelain poems in June 2020 during like the mass protests that were happening all over America, and I remembered I had began wanting to think about porcelain and its histories, but then at the same time, I was reading about like all the looting that was happening in the Old Summer Palace, right? And but then there was also this weird dissonance where I was hearing about the looting happening in the news and like all the weird like narratives surrounding that. And I was thinking about how the word itself, like loot, like it's so charged, but it gets thrown in vastly different situations. It gets wielded, it gets weaponized, right? And that was exactly what was happening in the 2020 protests. And so I at first I thought, okay, well, this has nothing to do with that. But then the more I thought about it, the more that I could see these connections, right? I could start seeing these connections. I didn't even intentionally, well, at first I just thought like in terms of like the concreteness of the poetry, like I thought, oh, it'd be kind of cool if it looked like a vase, right? And then I sort of did this thing where I shaped it like a vase, but then I found in my weird experiments that if I center aligned the poem, which I've never done before, I've never ever center aligned a poem before, because it's just terrible. It's very cringe, but I found that if I center align the poem, it just turns into like this vase. And I thought, I'll make an exception for my rule, right? And so I wrote a bunch of these, like in the course of that like just a few weeks, like June of that summer, and I did find these weird, strange coincidences. Like, for example, like even thinking about like who was looting Beijing's Old Summer Palace. It's these royals in like France and Britain, and like France, especially the like King Louis the whatever wife, she was given all of this loot, right? But then at the same time I like found that like a statue of him was basically like taken down by the protesters in Louisville because of Breonna Taylor. So I was like, whoa, that's chilling. That's like weird. Like you wouldn't think that these two things had anything to do with each other, but they really do. It's about attempting to topple empires, right? And like I would say that that's kind of what this whole book is about, really, is like the toppling of kingdoms and empires.
Yeah, I love that the constant connection that you make between sort of the colonial history or looting of China, of the porcelain and so forth, and also on porcelain there's also again the question of beauty comes up, and the speaker wanting to have to be made of porcelain or to be like her porcelain dolls, and the irony is that porcelain is made in China, but when you think of porcelain, skin, it's associated with white women and the fragility of white women, female beauty, and there's you kind of write about that, and then it takes a surprising turn to towards the end when you write about Emmett Till. So there's always this kind of back and forth between the past and the present, and with Black Lives Matter, with the Black Lives Matter protests, and also, of course, with COVID, because the following poem is Batshit, and which is about which is sort of explores the xenophobia, which you always tie from the past, the 19th century, to the present, xenophobia, where there was the fear, there was the kind of yellow peril kind of coming back and so forth. And I was wondering with poems like Batshit or Wet Market, like when you were Wet Market is also just sort of the kind of really racist or the racist origin stories of where COVID came from, right, from the wet market and Wuhan and so forth, and that immediately people jumping to like Chinese, equating Chinese or the Asian race to dirt, pestilence, eating anything, and so forth. And I was wondering, like, when you wrote these poems, were you writing them during the pandemic, and how you see them now, because I think that there are also a lot of, I think like there are a lot of people who like wrote COVID poems and fiction during COVID times, and then there's also kind of a sensitivity to it, like about writing something during COVID times, and there's also like, and I also noticed that a lot of, even among just conversations with certain Asian, like it's not just white people, but Asians, that they're like, when people think about it, when the discussion of anti-Asianness comes up, they're like, well, that was during COVID times. Like people don't want to look back, right? Even though it happened like last year. But so I was just wondering about, like, when you were writing, because it seems, yes, it's very timely, but I was wondering if you were writing these poems concurrently with the pandemic, and how you see these poems now after post-publication.
Yeah, I did write these poems, Wet Market and Batshit, pretty much in, I want to say like April 2020. So like both the On Porcelain poems and the poems you mentioned are like they're COVID poems, essentially. I was like in a random house in Las Vegas in a gated community, just like really, I don't know how I got there. I think I was stranded, and then somebody said there's an empty house in this gated community in Las Vegas. So I was like, okay, I'll go there, I guess. And I just spent this weird, extremely weird, like 5-6 months during, like, in 2020, just like by myself in this house in Vegas. And I really think that I was writing them because it's like you're in your head all the time, and it just like the solitude of that time. It just like, if I didn't get something out of my system, I think I would have gone crazy. I just like would have just, I don't know, been beside myself. So I was just kind of like documenting things that were happening, weird things that I was noticing, and also, yes, connecting it back to like the history that shouldn't be forgotten is that like we were considered, like, Asian bodies were considered agents of disease like long before 2020. So and I wanted to kind of draw attention to that history because, like, not only did we have Angel Island, the immigration station, but we also had Angel Island, the quarantine station. where the immigrants were pretty much like they were probed and they were tested for ringworm, and they were like, it was assumed that their bodies were diseased. And that has come up again and again in history. And I thought, like this might be a certain moment in time, but this history gets repeated all the time. So so to me, like it was really important for me to be able to write into that at that particular moment. And now I still believe that now, because we haven't yet reached the end of the tunnel yet.
That's great. Oh, are we out of time?
Yes.
Just one more question.
Oh, one more question. Okay. I was wondering, there's this end. Okay, I want to just go back to the long poem, Kingdom of Surfaces, where towards the end you write, so Kingdom of it's a long prose poem, you could call it, about this adventure that you talk about, and there are all these figures who come up, like Chang and Eng and Anna May Wong, and also just a lot of it just like the whole kind of journey is the speaker being stuck in someone else's fantasy of China, of Asia, and not being able to and having trouble breaking out of this twisted fantasy that is not yours. And I think that's sort of the preoccupation of the book, is that the speaker is stuck in this Eurocentric Western patriarchal perception of the fantasy of China. And then it says, like, to a kingdom we tread on, frail and afraid as we are, to a kingdom with a better imagination. What is that like? I was curious if you could talk about it. What does that mean is that supposed to be hopeful? Like, is that supposed to be hopeful? And is it possible to break out of this fantasy?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I mean, I think there's a reason why that's at the end, because I again, like for me it's always like bleak, maybe something else. Right? I mean again, when I think of this book, I really think about like kingdom destroying and what that means, and maybe I wasn't even like really telling the truth when I said like the kingdom with the better imagination, because you're right, like what is that? Because we haven't yet encountered it. It could be the things that we imagine ourselves, because it could be just having like possessing the capacity to imagine something beyond what we are dealt with, right? And I mean, I'm thinking throughout this collection, it's like the task is really to destroy the kingdom, and even even the text, the original text where Alice through the looking glass, it's essentially her trying to destroy a kingdom, right? Like she's trying to do that. And then and the porcelain poems also, attempt to do that. And then at the very end there's a poem called, or near the end there's a poem called The Romance of the Castle Toppler, which is kind of a poem that examines a more Chinese literary trope, which is the trope of the kingdom destroying concubine, or the castle toppler, which is like it's like meant, this figure is meant to be like a terrible or an evil or a figure that is like bad, right? But then the more that I think about it, it's like this concubine who rises up the ranks of the palace and gets the attention of the emperor, and then like once she becomes like a concubine or an empress or whatever, he's like so distracted by her beauty that the entire kingdom falls down, or like the entire empire, like the dynasty collapses. And this is like a very common trope in Chinese like movies, TV, like literature, like and but then the thing that I think it's like meant to be like this misogynistic trope, right? But then who doesn't want to topple the empire?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It also makes me think of Helen of Troy too.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's turn to questions. I think I'm sure all of you are bursting with questions, so don't be shy.
Thank you.
Oh, thank
Yes.
For a question, I remember you were mentioning some like books that inspired you. Who are some of your other literary inspirations, like authors that inspire you, or maybe different kinds of books that helped you develop your writing style?
I mean, to be quite honest,
Butter me up.
like right there. I would have to say that like when I was writing like my last book, Oculus, I was very much inspired by what Cathy Park Hong was doing with Engine Empire. Like that was a huge influence on me. Like the way that you write is like speculative poetry, which like to me is like so cool. It's like, again, it's like that kingdom with a better imagination, because you like I loved like all your books, the Engine Empire book, that was really, I think, important to me. Yeah. Who else?
Thank you.
Who else? Who else is there but Cathy Park Hong? But yeah, no, it's real. Like I think that I didn't know what that kind of poem would look like, but like she has this like series of poems in Engine Empire called Adventures in Shangdu, which is like really hilarious, like poem in parts, and they all have some weird like detail in them. It's like this fictional city that was like invented, but it's like modeled after modern day Shenzhen, but it's like weirder and like topsy-turvy sort of version of Shenzhen, and there's always something speculative in those poems, and I love that. So
thank you. I like it when I'm describing the third person. As long as it's positive.
A question.
yes.
Thank you both so much for being here. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the selection of the image for the cover. Like that particular piece is so striking, and I thought it was digitally rendered at first, and I looked it up, and that is not the case. So just curious if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So covers, I basically sent a list of different artists that like would Grey Wolf consider like which artists. Like I gave them a bunch of choices, and then they really wanted this sculptor, which I think this sculptor Xiang, he makes like these busts. He makes these porcelain busts, and I thought that it definitely is like the most the most fitting, I would say the most fitting choice for the book, and they were able to get permission from his gallery, I guess. I think he's an Australian Chinese sculptor, and he's like the same age as my dad, so I'm thinking like, yeah, this like dad. Yeah, and yeah, that's the story of the cover. I do think he's done other book covers, or there are other book covers that feature his work. I think one of them is Eileen Chang, like the New York Review of Books cover has like a bust by him. So that's really cool because Eileen Chang is in this book. So I'm like, yeah.
Yeah, it's such a cool cover because it's so striking, and from afar, it could be like it looks like it could be like a discoloration or something, but then when you look up, it's so you have to look closely to see how intricate it is. Yeah. Other questions?
All right. Going once. Going twice.
I thought there was a hand that sort of. Were you had a question?
Oh, I was just touching my ear.
Oh.
It's just like advice for young folks and words.
Yeah, advice for young poets. I read a lot. I think just going to events like these, going to talking to your favorite poets, they might be socially awkward when you meet them in real life, but like most of us are pretty I would say genuine. Like I guess I think there's a great resource, which is like being in like a city that has a beautiful independent bookstore such as this, which has a full roster of great events. Like there are also lots of resources these days, I think, for young writers, like Kundimon workshops, like online workshops, where you get to potentially work with great writers. Also, there's lots of festivals out there that different cities host. Like I think as a young writer, I was really hungry for that kind of thing. I definitely, I found 8261, which was a big thing. Like that space, it actually offered free writing workshops, and that was huge for me at the time, right? Mm-hmm. So the internet is a great resource for everything.
I have a question. You're working on a book of fiction, and I'm wondering what that's like, that transition to fiction. Is it easy to, like, what the difference is, going from writing poetry to this book, this novel, short fiction?
Yeah, so it's a collection of short fiction, short stories. It's called Nine Tales. Mm-hmm. Nine Tales. And it's essentially, it's like, they kind of, hello? Wow. This mic is like, I'm
gonna use mine.
Oh, sure. It's like this collection of fabulous, like, fiction, and I definitely think it's so different from writing poems. I feel like at this point, like 3 books in with poems, I feel like I can do this, I can understand how to do this, but like with fiction, I'm just like, oh, what is this? I'm working on the edits right now for that, like as we speak. I have to turn them in this week, actually. So, and I would say that the edits are much more intense. Like I think, you get a few like questions in my poetry edits, and like it's fixable. I have like the right way to fix that, but with fiction there's like so many different avenues to go, and there's also so many more pages and so many more words, and I'm just like, why are there so many words? But I do think it's really fun. I've been working on the fiction collection since around the same time as this poetry collection, 2016. And it's been great. It's been eye-opening, and I felt like I was a student again as I was working on the pieces, which like that is a great feeling, because you have a lot to like learn and like grow used to, and my editor is very patient with me, so that's great. Right. Is that it? Any more questions, or are we? I think we're good.
Okay, so
All right. All right. Thank you everyone so much for coming. Thank you so much for coming on a Monday night.
Can we give one more hand for Sally?
Thank you, Cathy. It's like my idol.
I really appreciate having both of you here. Thank you so much for your close reading and your questions for Sally. And Sally, congratulations, and thank you for letting us celebrate with you. I am just here to say thank you to all of you, and that I'm going to have you, Sally, at the back desk here to sign books. We have copies available at the front. You can find them there and bring them back here. If you need to know where to go, I'm happy to tell you. And if not, we will see you next time. Thank you so much.